are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Coming up on today's Camilla Tominey show, I'll be asking Business Secretary Grant Shapps for his reaction to Liz Truss's extraordinary 4,000-word salvo in today's Telegraph. I'll also be speaking to Labour's Lord Faulkner, and in a Brexit special, I'll be asking the Tory Spartans whether they think Brexit's been a success or a failure. All that and more to come, but first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Liz Truss claims she wasn't given a realistic chance to act on her policies when she was in office in her first major comments on her premiership since leaving Number 10. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, the former Prime Minister says she wasn't blameless in what happened, but blamed a lack of political support. She said she stands by her low-tax agenda, calling it a break from leftwards thinking within the party. Ms Truss resigned after 49 days following economic turmoil caused by her mini-budget. A key witness in the search for missing mother of two, Nicola Billy, has come forward. That's according to police. Officers appealed for a woman to come forward who was seen in the area on CCTV wearing a yellow coat and pushing a pram. The search for the dog walker is entering its 10th day. Her family have questioned a police theory that she fell into the River Wyre. The head of the Royal College of Nursing has called on the Prime Minister to make a new, meaningful pay offer in order to avoid upcoming planned strikes. The NHS is facing what some are calling the biggest strike day the service has ever seen, as tens of thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England are set to walk out tomorrow and Tuesday. The Health Secretary has called the action regrettable, saying it will undoubtedly have an impact on patients. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Camilla.
Well, good morning on this sunny Sunday. Thank you very much for joining me. She's back. Liz Truss is back on the front pages of the newspapers. Those who thought the lady wasn't for turning, or indeed, well, she's certainly not for hiding. She's come out with this extraordinary 4,000-word salvo against the government, justifying her premiership. Be very intrigued to know what you think of all that. Are you in favour of Trussonomics? Did she get the economy right, but not perhaps the execution? We'll be speaking about that and more a little later in the show. Jam-packed as ever. We've got Grant Shapps, the business secretary. I'd be intrigued to know his reaction to Liz Truss's intervention, but also, of course, the ongoing saga involving the Justice Secretary and bullying. Dominic Raab. I'm also going to be speaking to Labour's Charles Faulkner about the party's hopes of trying to achieve a Blair-like victory. Lord Faulkner was flatmates with Tony Blair, so I'll be intrigued to know what he thinks about Starmer by comparison. And I'll also be speaking to the economist Roger Bootle, one of the few that supported Brexit. And we've got some polling which suggests that you're not necessarily as happy with how Brexit has gone as you should be. And I'll be asking Mr Bootle what he thinks about the economic picture. Let's just go through the headlines first of all. I've obviously already mentioned this major news on the front of the Sunday Telegraph with Liz Truss having written for the paper. Just make sure you can see that here. Truss, I was brought down by the left-wing economic establishment, she argues, with a nice new photograph of her. She's come out of hiding for that. The Mail on Sunday. 2 new clues in search for missing Nikki. This story of this young mum having gone missing still hasn't been solved, so they've covered that. They've also got this extraordinary story which the Sun on Sunday has got on the front. I'm the older woman who took Harry's virginity. Again, that's one to discuss in just a moment. Sunday Times. They're saying Sunak's threat to pull out of the ECHR. We've not heard that before from the Prime Minister, so that's an interesting angle that the Prime Minister now might be thinking that's the only way to solve the migrant crisis. Here's the Sun on Sunday. I referred to that just now. They've done a joint buy-up, it seems, with the Mail on Sunday for the lady who took Harry's virginity. That's the story that keeps on giving. The Observer, 0 chance Tories will meet pledge of 40 new hospitals. Of course, that was one of Boris Johnson's trademark pledges during the leadership and beyond, that he would build 40 more. I think the Telegraph did a story that they've only started work on about 6 of them. Sunday Mirror, my hell as Tory MP's slave. Again, an extraordinary story about a Tory MP's treatment of a housekeeper in his care. And then the Sunday Express, lives at risk after cancer plan is ditched. And it's very appropriate. I've got the Sunday Express in my hands because I'm joined now by Fleet Street legend, in her own lunchbox, Eve Pollard, who once edited the Sunday Express and the Sunday Mirror. Let's get straight into it, Eve. What have you chosen for your first story?
You've got to go with Liz Truss.
You have to.
I mean, if I was Liz Truss, I'd be lying down in a darkened room for another 6 months. But she's come out, says she's not blameless, says that she wasn't given any advice about what would happen to pensions, which, of course, were the first things that started to collapse the minute she brought out her policies.
Do we believe her on that, Eve?
I'm not sure, but I'd love to know. I'd love to ask the department. Did none of you help her?
Yes.
And, of course, she thinks she's got another chance. There's another person having a go at Rishi. I mean, all these ex-prime ministers coming out having a go at Rishi.
If it's not Boris making his interventions on Ukraine this week and giving interviews, it's now her. When you said she should have laid low for a little longer, is that what you believe? Should we not really have heard from her for, what, a year?
Well, 44 days as a Prime Minister is some sort of record. And, in fact, whatever you say, the Tories are in a very difficult position now to attack your leader, as it were, right now, so early. You'd have thought she might have waited to see how things were going next year.
Or is it a defence? It seems to me that she is trying to, in a way, rewrite her political epitaph by making this point. Let me just pull out this particular quote, which I thought was interesting. She's talking about pushing water uphill when it came to trying to push her own economic policies. This is partly because we Conservatives had failed to make these arguments enough since 2010. She's saying that they were triangulating with Labour policy, this idea that the Tories have gone too red on economic policy. It's right that she's holding Tory feet to the flames on this, isn't it?
It is right. And, of course, she talks about she didn't realise how much vested interest was staged in the blob. And the blob, of course, is her way of referring to the civil service and the orthodoxy of all the sort of people on the financial side. And she's right in a way that we now seem to be in a country that believes in high taxes, and that will get us out of trouble. And, of course, when they put this to the party members, not, remember, MPs, and said growth is good, the party members put their hands up and said, we'll go for that.
Yes.
But, of course, it was totally the wrong moment.
If you didn't go for it, you were in the anti-growth coalition, weren't you? I mean, is it a bit lacking in self-awareness, this, though? Is she showing enough contrition?
Well, it's not so much contrition, but timing is everything in politics, as we know. This is too early, too soon, and you're battering against a Prime Minister who's trying to say, I am going to make a difference, I am going to change the way that the water is running, as it were. Very early to come out.
Too early. Now, we've picked as oversharing story of the weekend this extraordinary tale where both the Sun and the Mail appear to have tracked down the woman who really took Harry's virginity. Give us some context to this, Eve, because I know you read Spare, and it was the gory details were in that, weren't they?
Gory details were in that. And, of course, Rupert Everett, the actor, said yesterday he knew who the girl was. It turns out she's Sasha, who was working with the horses at Highgrove, Prince Charles's home. Now, what is interesting, she's rather sympathetic to Harry. She said this was a fumble in the jungle, well, actually, behind a pub.
Yes.
She says it all happened within 15 minutes.
Yes.
And it's fairly close to the description he has, where he said she treated me like a stallion, slapped my ramp and went off.
Yes, although there's one notable exception in that she isn't quite the older woman I had in mind.
Not mine neither.
So she's 2 years older than him, which actually makes her younger than Meghan is.
Exactly. It's
so
quite
it wasn't quite the kind of elder stateswoman.
No, it wasn't the sort of courtesan who was showing him the ropes. And what is terrible, because when you read this story and it goes on, they've never talked or texted or seen each other since.
No.
It's not ideal for your first outing.
No, but it was maybe many people's first outing is like that. But it was a bit, yes, it was kind of like over in one episode and that was that. Do we think that 17 pages of news copy should have been devoted to this?
No. But, you know, the truth is this story took on a life of its own. And if we'll pay 20 million to write a book, the publishers want every single detail. They can go it, and he gave it to them.
But you're a former tabloid editor. I mean, did you look at the book and think this is TMI, too much information?
On many, many things. Let's not go into all the details. Too much information about his personal things, about his personal parts of his body.
Yes, frostbitten genitalia.
20 million, you know, you have to give them everything.
Well, indeed you do. Now, there's another interesting story. It's not related to his one-night stand with Sasha, but it is called Operation Harry in a Hurry.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, in the Mail on Sunday, they're saying, and I think another paper, they're saying that they now think that Harry will come over from the coronation, but on his own. He'll come over for 48 hours. That may be the answer. I think that the King very much wants him there. And I think he probably feels it's another, perhaps a way to somehow make up in this terrible, terrible riot between them both. And if he does fly over, I suppose it will be less of a circus. We'll see him, I hope, sitting with the royal family.
But no Meghan.
No Meghan, and no, we hope, talk about what they said and who said what and who was friendly to.
But what's your hunch on that? I mean, I personally think it's unlikely Meghan's going to turn up. I think they'd be very worried about a negative reception.
Correct.
We've been in a situation where the King has twice been almost egged.
And there could be boos. There were boos outside St Paul's Cathedral, if you remember.
Yeah. Louder boos this time round after the book,
I would think so. I think people are quite shocked. Whatever the family, don't wash your dirty linen in public. I mean, it's never a good thing.
Although it does look reasonable by the King if he just extends the invitation.
Yes.
Then it's in the Sussex's court, and then if they reject it, they then look unreasonable. They're in as difficult a position, really, as the royals, in the sense that they're going to look truculent and like they're not trying to kind of calm very troubled waters.
And there are stories in the paper this morning that America is starting to fall out of love with them because they just moan and whine. And the Americans quite like our royal family.
Yes.
They love the pictures, they love the pageantry.
Well, they don't like the curtain being pulled back either, I think. They don't like this kind of Wizard of Oz-esque expose by Harry.
Yes.
Now, on to completely different matters. This front page of the Sunday Times on Rishi Sunak and the ECHR is interesting because we'd associate this thinking with the likes of Suella Braverman, but not necessarily the Prime Minister.
Except I think this is Sunak's threat to pull out of the ECHR. And that's if Strasbourg says that when we decide to go for whatever the rules are going to be, the new rules about immigration, whether you can land here, how legal you are, whether you can be sent straight back, if the European Court votes against us, he feels he can pull out of the convention. I think this is a test of two things. Immigration matters a lot to many people in this country.
Yes.
but also competence matters a lot. And I think they want to see something started, finished, completed and carried out. And I think that's very important.
Also, I think it's the issue he has to solve if he's got any hope of winning the next general election. Eve Pollard, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Lovely to see you this morning. Well, there you have it. Now, I'll be very, very intrigued to find out what our GB News panel, our People's panel, which is currently in Harlow, makes of Liz Truss's intervention. Catherine Forster, our reporter, is there. Catherine, what's the talk of the morning in Harlow?
Oh, well, we've been chewing the fat on Brexit, but basically on Liz Truss. Not a huge amount of sympathy, I have to say. We're here at the Master Barista restaurant in the centre of Harlow. We've come to Harlow because Harlow was one of the biggest Brexit voting places in the country. They voted 68% to leave. Let's talk now to the manager of the Master Barista, Scott. Scott, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell us, how's business and also what challenges are you facing at the moment?
Business has been really good for us. We're in a prime location in Harlow and we've got great value customers that use us. However, the cost of living has affected our business. Business rates have gone up, the utility bills have gone up, food and drink, produce costs have gone up, and therefore we have to put our prices up, which then stops people from spending money with us in Harlow.
A difficult time for many people. Thank you, Scott. Let's now go and meet our People's panel. Just follow me over here. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us on GB News this morning. So we've been talking about Brexit 3 years on. Keith, you are a retired chartered accountant. You voted leave. How do you feel it's been going?
Well, I think so far so good, but the benefits of Brexit will depend on a myriad of small changes in the economy, some large ones, but some small ones, a lot of small ones, and I think that will take time. So, 5 or 10 years I give it before making a final decision on whether it was a success or not.
Too soon to say. And Kay, you also voted leave. You work as an administrator in the local hospital. How do you feel it's going and are you satisfied at the moment?
I think it's too soon to say. I don't think the last 3 years have been a true reflection because, for the best part of 2 years we shut the economy down, we paid healthy people to stay at home and a lot of those people actually haven't come back into the workplace, so definitely too soon to say.
And Fraser, you're a project manager and you actually voted Remain. Would you still stand by that? Has it been a disaster?
No, I mean, yes, I did vote Remain. My daughter's in Budapest, so it made sense for me to vote Remain. But seeing the way that the European Union have acted towards Britain and the negotiations and what they continue to do, no, I'd vote Leave if I was asked again.
Interesting. Now, we're going to be talking to Business Secretary Grant Shapps in just a couple of moments. Kay, you'd like to know, you've got concerns about immigration, haven't you?
I do, yeah. I think the underlying vote on Brexit was to be able to control our borders. I do feel that the only thing controlling our borders now is the weather. We're paying a lot of people to stay in hotels. They're £40 a week pocket money. What is the government's intentions with these people? Because they've got no good documentation, basically unemployable because you can't check DBS or otherwise.
A lot of people very concerned about people crossing the channel in small boats. And Keith, you were talking earlier, you're concerned about the level of spending.
Yes, I mean, that well-known civil servant Sir Humphrey Appleby used to say, the Treasury doesn't work out what it needs to spend and then think of ways to raise the tax. The Treasury raises as much tax as it can and then works out ways to spend it. I'd like to know what the government is going to do about cutting public spend, because it is, I promise you, out of control.
That's an excellent invitation from Yes Prime Minister, an absolute classic. Fraser, you're also worried about the level of taxation.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Keith has just said, it's relating to we're raising corporation tax, but yet we're trying to attract entrepreneurs and startups to Britain. It doesn't quite tally how that's going to work.
Thank you all very much. So lots of questions for the Business Secretary and we'll be back with you later, but back to you for the moment.
Thank you very much for that. That was Catherine Forster, our political correspondent in Harlow. We went to Harlow because it was one of the areas that voted most predominantly Leave. And a little later in the show, I'm going to be speaking to two different people about Brexit and how it's panned out. We've got a special report with me speaking to some Tory Spartans about how they think it's been a success or a failure. But I've also got Professor Matt Goodwin coming in. He's the Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, who does a lot of polling for GB News. He's got some really interesting findings about what you think about how the project has gone. Not really overwhelmingly successful in your eyes, unfortunately. And I'm also going to be speaking to the economist Roger Bootle about the economic picture. As you will be well aware, and I had this a bit in the week because I had a bit of a row with Anna Soubry about the economic impact of Brexit. The Remainers like to blame everything on Brexit, and I'm going to ask Mr Bootle whether he agrees with that. Don't forget that you can apply yourself to be on the political People's Panel. It's gbnews.uk/panel. We want to hear your views from around the country. This isn't just a London-centric show. The whole point about GB News is that it's the People's Channel, so that's what we want to hear from you. Equally, if you've got any opinions at all on my interviews or the political scene this week, or indeed Liz Truss's intervention, then please do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, typically we're waiting for the Minister, Grant Shapps, to get on the line. He's coming to us following another interview. So in the meantime, I'm going to bring Eve Pollard back in just to finish off one of the stories that we didn't mention in the paper review. Now, it's the water cooler story of the weekend. What are we all talking about, Eve?
We're talking about the Happy Valley series, which is going to end tonight, and we're all going to be watching it. I mean, it's one of the best series that's been on TV for years.
And there's a really interesting story, I think it's in The Observer, from the child actor, now teenager, who plays the grandson in this, the central character really, that Tommy Royce, the criminal, trying to get his hands on this child.
And to take him abroad.
Take him abroad to Malaga, or Marbella, I think it is.
Yes.
And he's saying that he was kept in the dark about what Sally Wainwright, the scriptwriter, was going to plan for this grand finale. So there's a number of different theories doing the rounds.
And they were secret, apparently, you know. Many people who are actually acting in this don't know how it's going to end. So that's so exciting.
I know, and the versatility, actually, of the actress, Sarah Lancashire, who is starring in this show.
She's brilliant, isn't she?
She's been absolutely captivated. And perhaps, actually, given the police a good advert at a time when it needs a bit of a morale boost. Sure. I think faith in the police is at an all-time low, and yet faith in PC Catherwood, as she is known, is at an all-time high.
Yes, exactly.
I was also interested to ask you, Eve, with your former editor's hat on, what you make of Brexit 3 years on. I was in the week, went to an event that Sir Bill Cash had organised with all of the Tory Eurosceptics sort of celebrating the 3rd anniversary of our exit from the EU, and we're going to watch that in a while in the show, but it's the viewers here, and I think the general feeling amongst Leavers, not just Remainers who kind of want to say I told you so, is that it's been a bit of a disaster.
It's been very slow. I mean, on the one hand, where are the economic benefits? Where are the free ports? Where are all these exciting things that were going to change this country, particularly in the levelling up situation? And number two, I mean, everybody says we have no ambulances because all the ambulances were Italian drivers, all the nurses were Romanian. You know, that's obviously a simplification because we know there are millions of Brits who've not gone back to work since COVID. But there is that feeling that the restaurants are struggling to find chefs, that people are struggling to find people, and that's damaging the economy at the moment. I guess there are a lot of people. I was very sceptical about Brexit, but we wanted to see something happen. And this was a great vote, an extraordinary vote, and then it all went quiet. And I think that's what people are sad about, that not more has happened.
Yes. Are people angry, do you think, with Boris Johnson having squandered this great opportunity? I mean, from a tabloid perspective, this guy is gold dust, he makes for good copy, he arrives and there is a story, and yet this 80-seat majority has been squandered. Reports in the week that basically it only really amounts to a 20-seat majority now.
Well, of course he had COVID, and of course he's had Ukraine, and he's actually on Ukraine been brilliant, but the trouble is, there's this huge government. We are told all the time about the blob, thousands of people. We don't understand, OK, he's the Prime Minister, there is a cabinet, there's only so many people. We don't understand why nobody else has been working really hard to make this happen. And that's when we start to believe the blob, because we think, are the civil service behind the government? Who's really running Britain?
And I think as well, what's been interesting, and there's been a shift, and maybe it's because of Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, but would you have imagined at a time when you were editing the Sunday Express that people would now be associating Labour as being the low-tax party?
Never. I mean, it's extraordinary. And, of course, the more Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak say, lowering tax, no, that's the last thing. They've got to understand, you know, we're more sophisticated now. If they're saying this and they lower it 6 months before the election, too little, too late.
You think people will think it's a cynical ploy
of
to
course,
get their
and
vote?
then, you know, just after we elect them in, they'll remove that. You've got to be cleverer than that. And I think everything seems to be taking too long.
I'm going to have Grant Shapps on hopefully shortly. We're just waiting for him to get mic'd up and be camera ready. What do you think I should ask him? I mean, bearing in mind this Liz Truss intervention isn't great for the current sitting government, is
Well, I'd ask him how he feels. He's in the cabinet. They must feel that there are pot shots taken every day.
I think he's good to go. Thank you very much indeed again for your time this morning. That's Eve Pollard. Now, Grant Shapps, the Business Secretary, I hope joins me now. Can you hear me, Minister?
Loud and clear.
Grant, great stuff. Look, I need to ask you about Liz Truss writing this 4,000-word piece in the Sunday Telegraph today, basically accusing Conservatives of being triangulated with Labour on economic policy. Do you recognise that characterisation? What's your response to her piece?
No, look, I think that Liz's instincts are very conservative in the sense that we want to see taxes, lowered over a period of time. But I think everyone recognises we've been through, hell with coronavirus, which added, £400 billion at least of expenditure. We then had a war in Ukraine, which has pushed up energy prices and inflation and been very, very costly. We're paying right now about a third of people's energy prices, actually thanks to Liz Truss putting that in place for households and for business. All of that costs money. We need to deal with that. We need to deal with the high inflation and grow the economy, bring down debt, and we'll be able to cut taxes as well. But you need to do it in that order.
Some people might say you've had 12 to 13 years to solve these issues, Mr. Shapps, and actually it's all too little too late to win the next general election.
Well, of course, no one predicted coronavirus and the enormous cost to individuals and to economies, and no one wanted to see Putin illegally invade Ukraine, and these are expensive things. And by the way, what's happening to us is what the rest of the world is experiencing in the West as well. It's expensive for lots of economies, and it would have been the same no matter who was in power. The difference is our instinct is to make sure that we get the budgets under control. We're doing that, and not just the economic measures I just discussed, but also cutting the NHS waiting lists, stopping the small boats, something, by the way, Labour have voted against every single time they've been given the opportunity.
Although not making enough progress on the 40 hospitals that were built, Mr. Shapps. Apparently work's barely started on any of them, and it's highly unlikely that they're going to be finished within the time frame set by Boris Johnson.
Well, let's wait and see. We've still got, up to nearly 2 years, potentially, but certainly a year and a half to go.
You can't build a hospital in 2 years, though, Mr.
And there is a lot of work. Well, often it was building and refurbishing hospitals, and there's a huge amount of work underway. For example, in my local area, we've seen, actually outside of that particular programme, we've seen new diagnostics come in recent times. Just up the road from me at the Lister in Stevenage, we've seen massive new investments there for that hospital, and we're seeing the same across the country. So we're putting record amounts into the NHS. The big priority right now is to cut the waiting list that built up through coronavirus when everyone was stuck at home, and we're making progress there as well. We've got rid of the 2-year waiting list. We're on target to get rid of the 18-month waiting list, I think, by this April. So we are making a lot of progress, but I think this Prime Minister can be credited of stabilising the situation after the Ukraine invasion and all of the political machinations of the autumn.
Is it a stabilised cabinet, though, when you've lost your party chairman and there are continued stories about Dominic Raab's alleged bullying? Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg said earlier in the week that he thought some of his staff might be behaving as snowflakes. Do you share that view?
Look, that's the whole point in having a proper independent investigation into these things. I don't want to see a situation where the moment that somebody says something, everyone says, "Oh, well, that's it. They should be suspended." You've got to have a proper process in place, right? And that's what this process gives us. It gives us somebody looking at all of this properly. I can only tell you from personal experience. I've only ever seen him being very polite, including not to me, but to other officials in the room. He's certainly very determined. He's the sort of person who knows what he wants to get out of the system, and I think the investigation will get to the bottom of all of that.
But in any other workplace, surely, Minister, he would have been suspending pending the investigation. Why is he still working with these people who have accused him of this bad behaviour, allegedly?
Well, in fairness, I don't think anybody watching this would think it was fair that if somebody or even a series of people made accusations, and by the way, there are people who say that's not true, also very senior civil servants who are saying that's not true, if that's all it took to get you suspended and destroy your career. And I'm not talking about a politician, I'm talking about anyone here. So I think it is right to follow a proper process rather than just jump to the conclusion without actually having heard any of the evidence. So I think the system's in place. I think that's important. And look, just back to your original point, this cabinet is absolutely determined to get on with the job as the Prime Minister outlined, and he's been very clear about what we want to see happen. We want to halve inflation. We're on track to do that. We want to make sure we get growth in the economy. That's the thing that I'm doing as Business Secretary, scaling up Britain, trying to bring growth into the economy through all of the great tech leads we have. We want to cut debt. We want to ensure that we cut the waiting times in the NHS, and we're succeeding there now. And we want to stop the small boats, something, as I say, Labour have zero interest in doing, and the public really care about.
This is a distraction, though, isn't it, Minister, in the sense that there's an anonymous Cabinet Minister quoted in the Telegraph today saying Dominic Raab should go. Was that you?
No, it certainly wasn't, and it's only a distraction if that's what you want to talk about in this interview. If you actually, I reckon most people probably do want to talk about what we're doing to tackle the NHS waiting lists after COVID, or stopping the small boats and the illegal gangs who are trafficking people to this country. I think those are probably the issues that actually concern far more people than,
I think, Minister, to be fair, people on small boats will say, well, you've been in power for more than a decade. Why haven't you stopped them already?
Because these are people coming over by illegal gangs who are trafficking them. Because every time we try to change the law, we've been blocked by Labour, in part through their influence, including in the House of Lords. I know we're in power, but in the House of Lords we don't have a majority. Sometimes through the courts and through lawyers constantly challenging what we're saying and what we're doing. And so that's the reason why it's taken a long time. But our determination to fix that problem is absolutely resolute. You will not get that with a Labour government, who actually, frankly, seem to be want to do anything but stop the small boats, because they vote against every single measure that we take to stop them.
The former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, writing today in the papers, has said that the government does have the tools it needs, but it's not using them. You were Home Secretary, albeit for a brief period, Mr Shapps. The government's not doing enough on this. Perhaps you agree with the Prime Minister that we should be leaving the ECHR?
Yeah, I was Home Secretary for all of 6 days, and I did have the chance to look at this, and I can see that it requires a whole range of different things to happen and work, including, by the way, the plan that says that if you come here illegally, without, through a route which is not a conventional legal route into the country, then you cannot claim asylum. Now, that is something that we want to legislate for. I know a lot of lawyers talk about whether it's compatible with international law. That's what we are testing out, and no one should doubt our determination to get this problem fixed. It's right up there, as I say, in one of the top 5 priorities for us
Minister,
as a government.
45,000 people came through in dinghies last year. It's not working, though, is it?
That's right. I mean, there are criminal gangs out there, unfortunately, who will people traffic. And we have to stop that. And to do that, we need to change the law. Frankly, it would be a lot faster and a lot easier if the opposition, if Labour supported us. They won't. So we're having to battle it through Parliament. We're having to battle it through the courts. And I think Rishi Sunak's steely determination to fix this problem is really important to the British people.
Finally, you were Tory chairman from 2012 to 2015. Who's your pick to replace Nadhim Zahawi?
I'll leave that one to the Prime Minister. That will be his call. It is a big job to do. I was chairman, as you said, up to the 2015 election that David Cameron won, and I know that it is a 24/7 job. But it will be for the Prime Minister to decide who he wants to put in that place, and I wish whoever he or she is the best of luck.
What do you think their top priority should be when it comes to winning the election in 2024?
Well, I think one of the biggest jobs of the chairman is to go out and explain, what we've done and our plan to help people. And I think, actually, the great thing for whoever the incoming chairman is they'll have a brilliant platform, because our priorities are the people's priorities, getting growth into the economy, halving inflation, actually being able to reduce debt over the longer run, cutting the NHS waiting list, stopping the small boats. These are the things people care about, and only the Conservatives are going to deliver that. So a chairman will be out there, I assume, across the country, selling that message, and that is the job of as a party chairman, as well as organising the campaign. As I well know, I wouldn't want to ever do that job again. I wish whoever does do it every success, and I'll certainly be lending them all of my help.
Yes, no answer. Yes, no answer, Mr. Shapps. Should Boris Johnson do that job?
I don't think he'll want to be doing that job, having been Prime Minister. I doubt he would be up for it.
That's a no, then. All right, thank you very much for joining me. That's
I haven't spoken to him about it, and you never know, right? Thank you.
Oh, so you're not ruling it out. It's not a no, it's a maybe.
I was talking about Boris Johnson, who knows? But I don't think it's very likely.
Well, who knows indeed. Thank you very much. That's Grant Shapps, the Business Secretary, joining me there. Coming up on the show, I'm going to be speaking to Charles Faulkner, the former Justice Secretary. Also going to be speaking to Professor Matt Goodwin. He's got some exclusive polling, and we're going to go back to the People's Panel in Harlow. Stay tuned. Oh, sorry. No, we're not. We've changed the whole agenda. Do excuse me. We're going straight to Lord Faulkner because Grant Shapps was a bit late, and that means we're not having the break. So pardon me. Lord Faulkner.
I was just getting ready to relax for
I
2
know,
minutes.
you were relaxing, and now we were like, bring you on, because,
Okay.
as is ever the case, the Government Minister has knocked out our timing. Now, I'd like to know your response to this front-page story involving Liz Truss. She's talking about how Trussonomics wasn't a bad thing. Perhaps the execution could have been better, but actually she's not really issuing so much as a mea culpa here, as a defence of her own economic policy. Do you buy it?
No, I don't, and I think she was fundamentally wrong in her economic policy. What she was saying was cut taxes and growth will go up. And the OBR made it clear the growth that would be obtained by her tax reductions would be some minuscule amount that would be completely eroded as far as individual members of the public were concerned by the massive increase in their, for example, mortgage rates. What I worry about is presumably Liz Truss is a powerful voice in the Tory party. The Sunday Telegraph has devoted pages and pages to this. Rishi Sunak is a weak Prime Minister. He hasn't got control of his party. If she represents a powerful force, are we going to have deluded Trussonomics again as informing the way that this government, the Sunak government, runs the economy? And look at Shapps, who you've just, sorry, I apologise, Mr. Grant Shapps.
Yes.
I mean, he didn't disown her in
But
any
she
way.
makes a point, doesn't she, about this stagnation and the idea that successive governments, including the one that you were involved in, have not been able to push growth higher because of this idea of treasury orthodoxy, that the markets are going to balk at anything a bit more economically creative.
So does that mean you do the wrong thing? Is that the idea? You do a thing that completely crashes the economy.
Are you happy with the tax burden right now, Lord Faulkner,
everybody
on the
would
public?
know it.
It's rising to what, 37.5% of GDP?
Everybody wants it to come down, but only when we can afford it.
So are you going to cap taxes or cap
Only
spending
when we can
if
afford
Labour's
it.
in power?
Only when we can afford it.
But why aren't you ever giving any flesh on the bones of any of your own economic policies? You stand from the sidelines, and this is what the viewers think, and you throw stones, and yet we haven't heard anything particularly concrete or cogent from either Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves. What are Labour's plans to solve this stagnation crisis?
First of all, we're going to boost the economy with £28 billion spent on a whole range of changes that will improve the climate change issues, the environmental issues, and they will not only do that, they will also bring a massive boost to the economy, but not a boost that only helps the rich, and not a boost which makes the market, which I noticed that Liz Truss is now calling the market some conspiracy of lefties, which seems to me to be mad.
Well, the anti-growth coalition, I think, is how she referred to them.
Could I look at your headline? Truss, I was brought down by the, quote, left wing.
Economic establishment.
Are these the people who own bonds? Is that what she had in mind?
Well, I think she's talking about the blob, which may be left-leaning.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yes, please do.
What does it tell you about Liz Truss? Is it not that she was more concerned about how she is to be remembered rather than what's best for the economy? So you've got...
Or she's just making an alternative economic argument. Let's get on to other matters.
OK, fair enough.
I'm interested, because of you having been a former Justice Secretary, what you think of Dominic Raab, your successor, whether he should have stood aside while this investigation was carried out, or do you agree with Mr Shapps that everyone's innocent until proven guilty, which as a legal man you'll probably agree with?
Well, everybody's innocent until proven guilty, but you've also got to deal with the practical issue. If serious allegations are made, and, for example, it is said that somebody might be intimidating staff, you've got to work out, until you discover whether the person has done it or not, what's the safest course, because you might be found at the end of the day to have done it.
Have you had any dealings with him? How did you find him?
I find him perfectly OK when I meet him. We're now at a point, I think, where we've only got a few days or a few weeks to go before Mr Adam Tolley of King's Counsel determines whether or not the allegations are true and what should be done.
But
is it a little bit late to be talking now about suspension? Because maybe it's next week, I just don't know.
But have we got a problem with senior politicians speaking robustly to members of staff and civil servants, and a degree of what Jacob Rees-Mogg has described as snowflakery creeping in?
Yeah, well,
I mean, do you worry that they can't cope with firm direction?
Well, doesn't it depend on the facts? So people should be able to say to the people who are working for them, this is what I want to be clear about it, I'll treat you with respect, but I expect delivery. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and if I'm not getting delivery, I say, look, this is not good enough. That is different from picking on junior members of staff, humiliating them and making their life absolutely hell.
Allegedly.
I'm not saying that's what Mr Raab was doing. I'm saying that's where the line sort of falls one way or the other. You can't determine what happened in an individual case, hence Mr Tolley looking at it.
You were flatmates with Tony Blair back in the day, and you would have been very familiar with the tactics of the likes of, say, Alistair Campbell, who wasn't afraid of expressing an opinion pretty robustly.
But I'm not afraid of... Are you complaining about that, Camilla?
No, I'm not complaining about that. We like to hear your opinions. We like opinions.
We
but
like
what I'm
you
saying
because you
is,
express opinions robustly.
Indeed so.
And that's okay.
Indeed so, robustly but politely. But I
Alistair
think
was not remotely a bully in any way.
Right. OK, but he did express himself pretty robustly with staff, is my understanding. All right, well, this is where I'm saying that's where the line is drawn.
Well, incidentally,
and maybe people back in his day might have taken his direction and his directness perhaps in a more convivial spirit than
this is a complete red herring.
Today.
I mean, Alistair was very popular with his staff.
Yes.
He was somebody who was respected as being fair. Yes, he wanted high standards from his staff. Everybody should want high standards from the people who work for them. That's not bullying. What is bullying is treating people unfairly, where people don't feel safe with their... And I'm not saying that's what happened with Dominic Raab. What I'm saying is Mr Tolley has got to work out what was actually happening. And if he was vile to the staff and made them feel terrified, then it's a horrible thing to do. He shouldn't be the Justice Secretary. But equally, it meant he wasn't getting the best out of the civil service, which is what you need.
As we've just been talking about Blair and that Blair-Campbell era, do you worry that Keir Starmer doesn't quite have his charisma and can't take people over the top as Blair did in 1997?
Blair was a very exceptional sort of politician, and there aren't very many of them. And if you look back over the last sort of 30 or 40 years, maybe one or two in all of that period. But that does not mean that Keir does not reflect and connect with what the public are feeling about.
But did the public connect with him as easily as they did with Blair?
Well, Tony had an exceptional ability to connect with the public. Keir is in a different position and at a different time. A different position because he's been in opposition over a long period of time. He's got to get to a point where the public have made up their mind whether they want to change the government. So I think it's a different sort of period. Tony became the leader of the opposition at a point where the Tory government was already discredited. Keir became the leader of the opposition after Boris Johnson won a massive landslide. He, over time, has built a position where he is now 20 percentage points ahead in the opinion poll. He's done it by quietly being in the right place.
Hasn't he just done it on the back of Tory failures?
That's obviously had a large part to do with it. But the public are willing to trust him as a potential Prime Minister.
Talking of the public, we've got some really interesting polling from the public and GB viewers about Brexit, and 49% of them don't think it's gone well. How does Labour handle Brexit? Because we heard David Lammy give a speech in which he talked about returning to a situation of alignment with the EU, which will be anathema to people in the Red Wall, let's be honest. What's your view on how Brexit's gone and how Labour should handle this issue moving forward?
Brexit has taken place. I think the last thing the public want is any sort of rerunning of the Brexit issue. We've decided to Brexit. We've done it. We've now got to make it work. So I'm strongly against any suggestion of going back into the European Union, going back into the single market, having a rerun of the referendum. But of course we should do as much as we can to be as close to our European allies as we can be. I don't think the Conservative Brexiteers were saying we're enemies of Europe.
No.
And quite separately, we want to trade with Europe. They're one of our major competitors and trading partners. So we need to work as hard as we can with the European Union to reduce trade barriers as much as possible. I think if Labour becomes the government, then I suspect the Europeans will think, look, we can have a much more grown-up and sensible conversation about...
The European Union might be rubbing their hands together with glee because Sir Keir Starmer, in his capacity as shadow Brexit secretary, did as much as he could to frustrate the Brexit process.
But Sir Keir Starmer, in his capacity as leader of the opposition, has made it clear that we accept Brexit. There's no going back. But surely we should have as friendly a relationship as possible and one that reduces trade barriers as much as possible without giving back control to the European Commission and the European Union, which was what so much irked so many people. And I just don't think the Europeans think the Conservatives are serious about all of this. And no doubt the European bureaucrats and the European leaders will be opening their Sunday Telegraph this morning and saying, good God, Liz Truss is back.
I know, there's always a room for a political comeback, as you well know, Lord Faulkner. Thank you very, very much for joining me in the studio this morning. Well, as you know, it's been nearly 3 years since the UK officially left the EU. And as I've mentioned, we've been speaking this week to a number of people who've been at the forefront of that debate about how Brexit is going. On Tuesday night, I went to a European Foundation reception to mark the anniversary, hosted by Sir Bill Cash, a Tory MP who's been campaigning for us to leave the EU since before it was fashionable. And I got to speak to some of the big beasts behind Brexit.
You have been the advisors and the movers of this great revolution. And well done so far, but ladies and gentlemen, it's only just started. We have a lot to do and a lot to prove.
The third anniversary of us leaving the EU and a celebration of some of Brexit's true believers. Among the political chaos of the past few months, this should have been a moment for them to savour.
Some of the people in the room behind me have spent their entire political careers fighting for Brexit. A lot of them are the Spartans that voted down Theresa May's deal, and they have dedicated their political careers to making sure that we leave the EU. But 3 years on from that anniversary, do they think Brexit has been a success, or does the government need to do more to make the most of our post-Brexit opportunities?
Former Northern Ireland Secretary Theresa Villiers.
I know that there's a lot more that we need to get done to make sure that Brexit is a success. I know it can be, but I think it's great that we've restored our status as an independent, self-governing nation, and we can no longer have laws imposed on us by people we don't elect and can't remove.
Former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith.
The bill going through that gets rid of European law, that's been delivered. You know, we've got a bill sitting in the Lords to deliver on Northern Ireland, if we can get that through. So there are things happening. But of course, we can really make the UK hum when we've done these things. But thanks to COVID, it's taking longer than we anticipated.
For many, the Northern Ireland Protocol remains one of the main pieces of unfinished business.
former Brexit Minister David Jones.
Well, I think we need to make clear to the European Union that we will not continue with a state of affairs whereby Northern Ireland, a part of the UK, is subject to a foreign administration and subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign court. And what we ought to be doing is pressing on with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which has gone through the Commons, which is now in the Lords.
There was a clear sense among the room that the institutions ran by Remainers were preventing what they see as a true Brexit. The former Brexit Minister David Jones, again on the House of Lords.
To crack on with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, to push it through the House of Lords, to tell the Lords that if they won't pass it, then we will invoke the Parliament Act and, if necessary, we'll consider abolishing them.
And with question marks growing over the Prime Minister, there were even calls for the return of another. The former MEP, David Campbell Bannerman.
You know, the party still loves Boris Johnson. The public does, generally. He has lost a few people, that's true. But I would watch his space, because I think there's huge pressure building to bring him back in triumph, because the polls are so dire now, nearly 30% behind Labour, that we need rescuing.
But in what role? As Prime Minister?
As Prime Minister. I mean, I think that is viable. We don't know if he wants to do it or not.
So with more internal rows over Europe that don't look like they're going away anytime soon, where does this leave the Conservative Party? The Telegraph's Chris Hope.
Brexit is a state of mind, really. It's about giving power back, sovereignty back to Britons to run their own affairs. And if they can't do it properly, and I do wonder whether Brexit is such a great responsibility, it's too much for the Tory party. And maybe it's Labour's chance to do what they can do, because I'm not sure this government can deliver on what the promise of what Brexit could be.
There's no mistaking the celebratory atmosphere in the room here. People from a democratic perspective are grateful that we can now self-govern and that we're an independent nation from the EU. However, as with the electorate, I do sense some frustration. The Brexiteers in the room want things to have happened more quickly. They want us to maximise the Brexit opportunities. So it isn't a case that Brexit has been done. I think it's more of a case that they believe on Brexit there's a hell of a lot more we have to do. Well, if the Brexit Spartans are a little frustrated, I'm wondering how you're feeling. Now, let me bring in Professor Matt Goodwin. He's done some exclusive Brexit polling for GB News by People Polling, his polling firm. And actually, Matt, makes for quite interesting reading this. Talk us through the top headlines. I thought this was the most interesting question you asked. Yeah. You asked people whether they felt Brexit had made them richer, and what did they say?
Yeah, well, very few people do feel that Brexit made them richer. And if we go back to that referendum, of course, one of the big arguments was that leaving the EU would make us better off economically. Only 2% of the country... 2% feel that Brexit has made them richer. Almost half the country feel that it's made them poorer. The rest say about the same. It hasn't really made a difference. What would worry me, were I within the Brexit camp, is that only 5% of leavers say that Brexit has made them richer. Now, you could respond to that and say, well, look, Brexit was a long-term repositioning. People said they were going to wait for those long-term effects to kick in. But currently, really only very small numbers of voters feel that Brexit is making them personally better off.
Although we could, I suppose, as Grant Shapps did earlier, blame global headwinds and Ukraine and all the rest of it. But there is that sense of frustration that the government hasn't done enough on it to deliver what people were promised.
I think there is definitely a lot of that. I think also if you look at the leavers who have become Remainers over the last 3 years, the main reason for that is not just about immigration reaching record levels, not just about the small boats, not just about the sort of chaos in Westminster. It has been shown in another study this week that it's mainly this sense that the economy has been weakened over the last 3 years that has flipped a few leavers into Remainers. Now, it's important to point out for your viewers, Camilla, that lots of leavers have not changed their minds. Lots of leavers have said, I still think, actually, on balance, Brexit is helping the country. And we should remember that big faction of the Leave vote. But there are a growing number of leavers who are now flipping into the other side of this debate.
And even if they're not flipping, this is an interesting finding. When asked whether the UK got a bad deal from the EU, only 4% of the public say that we got a good deal. Now, this is rather echoing former Brexit Secretary David Davis saying in the week, He referred to the deal and said it was CRAP. I'm going to say it like that on a Sunday morning. And you look at that and you think, well, you negotiated it. Admittedly, it turned from what he wanted into the Chequers deal, and the rest is history. But there's a lot of frustration, again, with the government's mishandling of this, seemingly from the very beginning.
I think that's absolutely spot on. If we ask people, do you think Brexit has been managed well or badly? Large majorities now, about 60% plus, say they think Brexit has been managed badly. There is a sense out there in the country that this entire process from 2016 onwards has just been managed badly by the political class. So that, without question, that has happened. But I think there's also a sense among a not insignificant number of Leavers that this deal was just simply the wrong deal, that they envisaged, I think, a cleaner break from Europe. I think they look at the European courts. I think they look at the European Convention on Human Rights. I think they look at our inability to take tough action with the small boats. And I think they're just saying, look, I thought we were getting control. I thought we were taking back control. But actually, they look around and they think, well, we don't have that. And I think there was a section of that Leave vote that really did genuinely want this kind of clean break, this completely, fully independent sovereign nation that could go out and do whatever it wanted in the world, etc., etc. And I think many Leavers just feel like they haven't really had that. They haven't really seen that. And that's partly reflected in these numbers.
And therefore, the final result, which I suppose is the definitive one as it stands, people asked whether they thought it was the wrong decision when we voted to leave the EU. And what did they say, Matt?
Yeah, so overall, almost half say they feel that leaving the EU was a wrong decision. If you take away the people who are undecided, that goes up to actually about 60%, which is in line with other polling. So what we've got here is a sort of creeping regret in the country, a sense that actually maybe this wasn't the right call. Now, I should caveat this with 2 points, because these points are routinely ignored in our media discussion. One is, underneath the surface, most Leavers still say this was the right decision. Most Remainers say this was the wrong decision. So you've got that polarisation between the two sides.
Some things never change.
Some things never change. The other thing, which many people routinely overlook, is that very few people actually want a second referendum on EU membership. Now, this is a crucial point because we're not out there seeing large majorities saying, I want to rejoin, I want to rejoin. Yes. When you actually say, do you think we should have a second referendum on the EU, the numbers is a small minority, typically 20, 25%, something like that. So it's not really this kind of yearning appetite to go back to the Brexit wars, to reopen the box, to have another referendum. But there is a creeping sense of regret. There is a sense out there, Camilla, that Brexit is now getting wrapped up with inflation, with the cost of living crisis, with the war in Ukraine, with the deterioration in living standards. And even if people can't quite diagnose what's driving all of that, and everything's getting blurred into everything else, there is a sense that Brexit is just not really delivering what people expected it to deliver.
But although people might not want to rejoin, I think there is a growing appetite for what I would describe as shadowing. So this is a little bit in line of David Lammy's rhetoric in his speech a couple of weeks ago, this idea that maybe we would be better with a bit of closer alignment, even if it doesn't mean re-entering the single market and the customs union. Are you picking that up in the polling?
Well, I think what's going to happen over the next 5-10 years, basically, is we're going to see a bit of what academics like me would call benchmarking. Brits are going to be watching how the EU is doing, and the EU is going to be watching how Britain is doing. And if it looks like the EU is powering ahead and Germany and Italy and France are doing much better than the UK, that will have a profound impact on our public mood. If, however, the UK manages to get itself together, manages to push ahead, can actually point to meaningful areas where it's diverging from the EU, and those are making a tangible difference to people's lives, then actually I think the politics of Brexit will change all over again.
One of the biggest pieces of unfinished business, obviously, is the Northern Ireland Protocol. Does Northern Ireland come up much in the polling and on the doorstep?
Not as much as you might think, because people aren't really drilling down into the detail. In the same way, they're not really talking to me about, the replacement of the Common Agricultural Policy or the Brexit Freedoms Bill or the deregulation of financial services and the Edinburgh reforms. People aren't really zooming into the detail. But underneath all of this is a really important point. If you voted for Brexit and you voted for the Conservative government, there is, I think, a point here, which is they have not really communicated clearly to the country the things that we've gained because we've left the EU. They have never really communicated those as loudly and consistently and as coherently as they could have done. The only things that have cut through are things like, well, the vaccines. We're able to move a bit more quickly than the EU, and maybe Ukraine. We were a bit, we're able to move quicker, be more decisive. But I don't think, in the battle of communications over Brexit, I think our debate, national debate, has been comprehensively won by the Remain side. And I think the Leave side have sort of vacated that territory and allowed it really to be dominated by the Remain side.
So briefly, but I realise this is a very complex question. Boris Johnson, electoral asset or liability? Just in a nutshell, Matt, if you can.
His polling numbers are not strong, Camilla. They're not strong at all. We asked last week, should he return to the cabinet? Most people say no.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Matt Goodwin, for joining me and for providing us with that exclusive polling. Now let's get back to Catherine Forster. She's in Harlow, a massive Leave area. Find out what the People's Panel think about what Grant Shapps told me. Are they convinced by the government's record, Catherine?
I would say the jury's out. Let's talk to them now. First of all, there's been a lot of chat about Dominic Raab. Kay is unconvinced about how people really feel about this.
I don't really think the majority of people really care what's going on with Dominic Raab. I think their main priority is public services, how to their utility bills, how to get from one side of Harlow to another without going down a pothole and within a reasonable amount of time. I don't think that Dominic Raab is even entering their remit, to be fair. It's an internal issue and it should be left there.
Sure. And Liz Truss, a lot of talk about her this morning. Fraser, what's your view?
It's old news, isn't it, really? Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister now. Really what he says is more important. He's got the power to make changes. So, Liz Truss can have her opinion, of course, but really I think what Rishi Sunak says is more important.
And listening to Grant Shapps just now, the Business Secretary, Keith, you're concerned about levels of spending. Did he say anything that reassured you?
Well, he seemed to run very quickly over the point he made about looking at budgets. I mean, public expenditure needs a really serious review, and people need to understand that public services, Kay works for the NHS, are paid for by commercial activities of people such as Fraser.
And Fraser, you were talking about wanting the tax burden to come down. Grant Shapps is saying we can't afford to do that right now, but we'll be looking to do that in the future. Are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, I think we can accept that, but a schedule or some sort of plan would be good, because then business can actually work towards something and know with some certainty what's going to happen in the future.
And the Brexit poll, we're talking that only 4% of people surveyed think that we got a good deal with the EU. 54% think we got a bad deal. What's your response to that?
I think it's fairly expected that we would get not a great deal. I think the European Union will try their best to make it look very difficult to leave the European Union. They're going to try and keep business as happy as they can, but still, it's not. I think it's not unexpected to. That's the result.
You both agree with that? Yep.
Yes.
It's not in their best interest, is it, for us to do well?
OK, so thank you very much for taking time out of your Sunday mornings to join us on the GBNews People's Poll in Harlow. Back to you in the studio, Camilla.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Catherine. Yeah, I think people are as ambivalent in Harlow, a major Leave area, as they are not only among the Spartans, but across the country about Brexit. But let's see. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to Roger Bootle, formerly of HSBC, now an economist at Capital Economics, about what he thinks about how Brexit's gone. We've also got a great generation gap coming up between two teachers, old and young, about the strikes. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you very much. It's 10:30. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Liz Truss claims she wasn't given a realistic chance to act on her policies when she was in office in her first major comments on her premiership since leaving Number 10. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, the former Prime Minister says she wasn't blameless in what happened, but criticised a lack of political support. She said she stands by her low tax agenda, calling it a break from leftward thinking within the party. Ms Truss resigned after 49 days following economic turmoil caused by her mini-budget. Police say a key witness in the search for missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has come forward. Lancashire Police appealed for a woman to make herself known to officers after she was seen in the area on CCTV footage wearing a yellow coat and pushing a pram. Her family have questioned a police theory that she fell into the river. The head of the Royal College of Nursing has called on the Prime Minister to make a new, meaningful pay offer in order to avoid upcoming strikes. Tens of thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England are striking tomorrow and Tuesday in what many are calling the biggest strike day in the history of the NHS. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Bootle, former chief economist for the HSBC Group and chairman of Capital Economics. Roger, a rare voice in favour of Brexit before it happened. We'll get onto that in just a moment. I'm intrigued by your reaction to Liz Truss bringing back the spectre of Trussonomics. What's your reaction to that? I mean, did she make a cogent argument badly, or what's your view?
Well, I was really very much supportive of her agenda. That's to say, the tax take has got much too high, it needs to come an awful lot lower, we need to deregulate, we need to go for growth. I was in favour of that. But I thought the execution was simply appalling.
Yeah.
She went at it much too fast, and also the manner was completely wrong. Now, you might think, as far as markets are concerned, they're not bothered about the manner and the style, but they are, because these things convey something. So abolishing the top rate of tax, which again I'm in favour of in principle, doing it that day when you took away the limit on bankers' bonuses,
yes.
And then the Chancellor, as he was at the time, going on television on the Sunday and saying, there's an awful lot more of that to come.
More to come.
Yeah, exactly. That's what really spooked the markets. I think if it had been done differently, in a different style and more modestly and less quickly, I think she could have got away with it.
But what about this characterisation? The front page of the Sunday Telegraph, the headline is, I was brought down by the left-wing economic establishment. I mean, is that an accurate portrayal of who's she referring to there? I guess a mixture of the Treasury, the Bank of England, the markets themselves.
Yeah.
Are they all left-wing?
Well, the markets certainly aren't. If anything, they're Conservative supporting. I think it's a bit unfair that. It's true to say that they would have been sceptical, to put it politely, about her programme. That's true. But that's not what brought it down. It was this appalling execution. And one of the things that I think undid her plan was that she hadn't realised just how febrile the markets were. I've heard her say this. She said that, look, during the pandemic, Rishi Sunak got away with dishing out squillions. And then more squillions,
yes.
And the markets didn't seem to bat an eyelid. And yet these comparatively smaller sums, they did balk at. I don't think she and the Chancellor quite realised how different the market circumstances were.
Although, does she make a good point about the OBR putting the government in a so-called straitjacket, in the sense that she makes the point that when Sunak was giving out the furlough cash, there wasn't an OBR forecast. And we've heard this a lot. You know, a lot of people, particularly on the right of the party, say, when have the IMF and the OBR ever been right about anything?
Well, there's something in that. I take a different view about the OBR. I think, frankly, they should have done a forecast. And if you were aiming for the long game, which I think they should have been doing, it wouldn't have mattered, I think, so much. The IMF intervention, I thought, was scandalous, quite frankly, was politically motivated.
In regard to Liz Truss, you don't mean what they said last week about Britain being behind the Europe. Just explain that for the viewers, because the IMF came in and they basically made a quite political statement about her economic ideology.
Right. Well, they came in and said they thought this was completely wrong and potentially dangerous. Bizarrely, and of course there's some suggestion they did that at the behest of someone in the UK authorities.
Right.
It was a very unusual intervention.
And then you can't, well, you can forgive Liz Truss then for thinking that the blob, the Remainer-leaning blob, was working against her, because we have historically heard these tales of chancellors going a bit native at the Treasury, even Rishi Sunak as a Brexiteer, because the Treasury is absolutely obsessed with trade and other links to the EU and doesn't want to rock the European economic boat. Do you recognise that characterisation?
Yes, I think she was right about the economic establishment and the Treasury view. There is something wrong there. It's defeatist, it's against tax cuts, it seems to be in favour of a large state. On all these things, she was right. But I don't believe that there was some sort of conspiracy against her. The simple fact of the matter is, I believe, that she and her team simply came across as incompetent, as reckless. And if you're in the Treasury or the Bank of England, that's not good news.
No.
So, and again, I think a lot of this comes back not to her ideas, but to the style and the speed of what she was trying to do.
Can we have an honest appraisal from you about what negative impact Brexit has had on the current economic climate?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with all those people who say that it's hit GDP, reduced GDP by 4.123 recurring. The thing that astonishes me about this is the confidence with which they opine on this. The simple fact of the matter is we don't know. We never know in economics, by the way, because we never know the counterfactual. That's to say, what would have happened in the absence of the event that we're talking about. And in this particular instance, the difficulty is even greater because since the Brexit vote, we've had a global pandemic, lockdowns, an energy crisis, and war in Europe. Now, they might have had an impact, you know.
Yes.
So we simply cannot tell. Having said that, my view is that probably Brexit has cost the economy something. I would hesitate to put a number on it, something. But the reason I say that is that if you go back to the Brexit debate, there was, of course, a discussion between pros and antis about what the economic effects would be. And I think the general architecture of this debate was quite clear. We thought that leaving the single market would be a net negative for the economy, and I agreed with that. And as against that, there was the possibility of striking free trade deals around the world and deregulating. Now, what we know has happened is that we have left the single market, and there have been losses from that, as we expected. There have been very few trade deals, and in particular not the big one with America, and we've hardly deregulated at all. So I think structurally it wouldn't be surprising to see that the economy's been hit a bit.
And do you think it's an error, because it would have been under Liz Truss's watch as Foreign Secretary, not to have secured that trade deal with America, or was it always going to be many years off?
I think it was always going to be many years off. It's not going to be easy, even if we get a Republican in the White House. But with a Democratic president, and certainly Joe Biden, it's frankly not on.
And we also look at the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's obviously a good thing for the British economy. But again, has the government progress on all this been just glacial?
Yes, it has. It's amazing how little has been achieved. Now, in some things, and I don't want to underestimate the difficulties. It's not easy to join something like that. But that's potentially very, very big news, because the countries involved in that are growing quite fast. Their importance in the world economy is increasing. By contrast, what a lot of people in this country don't appreciate is that the share of the EU in the world economy has been falling quite fast, and it's set to continue falling quite fast.
Just generally, with regard to trying to reassure the viewers, I mean, they couldn't have more bad news at the moment. At every turn, there is some sort of negative economic forecast. Bills are going up here. OK, we do have the promise of inflation coming down. We've heard that the IMF basically say that Britain is behind the rest of Europe when it comes to recovery. What's your analysis of the next 2 years? Do we actually have anything to look forward to come 2024, 25?
Yes, big time. I think this year is going to be pretty bad. I don't know whether the IMF's right or wrong about the UK. It's often wrong, by the way. But even so, and I'm an optimist in general, I think this year is going to be pretty poor. Consumer real incomes are going to be squeezed, the housing market's falling, interest rates going up, inflation, although coming down, is still very high, above wage rises. So it's going to be grim. What I think a lot of people don't appreciate is how much better next year is going to be, assuming we don't get intensification of global energy crisis. It's going to be a lot better. Inflation is going to be well down by the end of this year and continue falling sharply next year. Interest rates will peak. The housing market will stabilise. The public finances will look better. Unemployment it's going to go up. Will probably have stabilised by the end of this year. Next year, I think we could see a real bounce in the economy.
Fingers crossed. Did you think the Bank of England was right to put interest rates up to 4% in the week? Some people were thinking it wouldn't be that high. And do you think they're going to stabilise at that point?
No, I think the bank was right. I've been a hawk on interest rates for some time. Although inflation is coming down and it's going to fall, I think, quite rapidly, the problem is underlying inflation, because the published inflation rate, the headline inflation rate, is coming down because last year's big rises in costs are dropping out of the annual comparison. Meanwhile, pay rises have been going up. They're running at between 6 and 6.5%. And that's the key to the underlying rate of inflation. The fact is that the labour market is too tight for a variety of reasons. Pay rises are too rapid. And so the bank is going to have to be quite tough, I think, to squeeze the labour market. Not a nice thing to have to do, but it's what you have to do to get inflation under control.
We'll get on to wages in just a minute, but just on the bank, I mean, have they presided over catastrophic economic policy for far too long with ultra-low interest rates and quantitative easing? And actually, they're the ones who should be blamed for storing up what we're now faced with, particularly when it comes to homeowners. Where else were interest rates ever going to go but up?
Well, I'm not going to bash the bank. I do think they've made some mistakes, but frankly, this was a very, very difficult situation to have to deal with. Now, there's some people, purists, who argue that quantitative easing was completely wrong. We should never have had interest rates that low. I don't agree with them. The fact of the matter is that the economy looked to be terribly weak. And once the bank had got interest rates down to 0.1, which I think the bottom rate, what they had in the locker then was QE. And they had resort to it. I think it was the right thing to do. Their mistake, I would argue, was not to have recognised that the economy was recovering sooner, that inflation was rising quite alarmingly, and that the labour market was much tighter. So I don't complain about what they did then. I just think they should have changed more rapidly. They should have put interest rates up faster.
And a very brief word on just the strikes and wages. They are going to be inflationary if they give the likes of public sector workers, nurses, teachers, etc. too much of a pay rise, aren't they?
There's no doubt about it. The fact of the matter is that Britain has become poorer because of the increase in international energy prices, and that's bound to hit the real incomes on average. And of course, lots of people around the country, understandably, don't want it to be them. So they're taking action saying, let it not be us. But someone's got to bear it. And if they get compensated, then that will simply increase the burden on other workers.
And finally, corporation tax. We know how unpopular this rise is, particularly among small and medium-sized businesses who had a terrible pandemic. An extra 6% shaved off profit margins. Should Jeremy Hunt go ahead with that in the budget, do you think?
Well, I think not. Again, this is a case in which I think Liz Truss was on the right lines. It's not an enormous amount of money it's raising. It's giving all the wrong signals, particularly when the business world is worried about the consequences of Brexit. I wouldn't be doing it.
Roger Bootle, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Right, coming up, we're going to have quite the debate in our generation gap. We're going to have a pro-strike teacher, Callum Robinson, and an anti-strike teacher, Chris McGovern, to have the argument about whether the strikes in the week were a good idea. We'll be back in just a jiffy.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, we've got our Generation Gap segment still to come, but let's see what Michael Portillo has got coming up at 11 o'clock on his show. Michael, what are you going to be talking about?
Well, we've got Stephen Dorrell on to talk about the strikes in the health service and a couple of very eminent surgeons. We've got Vince Cable, who's going to be talking to us about whether we should have an extra tax on oil companies, more windfall tax. He was, of course, leader of the Liberal Democrats, but do you remember that he was also the chief economist for Royal Dutch Shell? But Camilla, what do you make of the re-emergence of Liz Truss? I have some sympathy with her on the point that she wasn't told about the impact on pension funds. And the pension funds were doing something pretty strange, were they not? That they were in such peril from a change in the economy that they almost tumbled. What do you make of that?
I agree with you. I mean, I don't want to go into the granular detail of LDIs. Somebody more qualified than me can say that. But I do think that the idea that she wasn't properly informed of the risks, particularly with the pensions market, was terrible. What do I think about her being on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph? Delighted. It's good for copy. I also don't mind her wanting to make the other economic argument. She might have been a very short-lived Prime Minister, but she's still a former Prime Minister.
It's a big issue for Rishi Sunak, isn't it? I mean, you saw there Roger Bootle, very respected economist, coming on and saying that there was much in the Liz Truss programme that he respected. And unfortunately, the consequence of the Liz Truss premiership was to close down the possibility of going down that road to growth. Maybe then some people would say, well, you had your chance, Liz. Maybe now you should give it a rest. But certainly it doesn't help Rishi Sunak.
No, it doesn't, indeed. Well, I'm really looking forward to watching the show at 11, Michael.
Thank you, Camilla. Enjoy your last debate.
Take care. Thank you. Well, the last debate is coming up. We talk from one Liberal Democrat to another because Callum Robertson joins me. He's a young teacher. He used to be a Lib Dem candidate. And then we also have Chris McGovern, chairman of the Campaign for Real Education, a retired head teacher and the former advisor to the policy unit at number 10 Downing Street. So we've got a millennial, can I say that, Callum?
Just about.
Just about. Somebody slightly older, Chris, I'll put it that way. Now, I mean, the strikes have been a massive topic this week. I ended up, would you believe it, helping out my son's school because they're a bit short-staffed, and I went and did a lesson with Year 11s on persuasive writing, which was interesting. There were about 70 kids in the classroom. I must say I'd rather do 90 minutes of live telly than teach a classroom full of 16-year-olds, but there you have it. On strikes, I suppose from a parental point of view, and lots of people think this, Callum, I'll bring you in first. Look, the children weren't in for huge swathes of the pandemic era. Teachers are largely working from home. Often they've been given a pay rise. Indeed, at my own school, I think they were given 8%. And the government has just come out with £2 billion worth more funding for the DfE. Therefore, is the timing of all this right?
I think it's a very fair set of questions. We need to look at this not just in the context of the cost of living crisis and the 8.3%, which is for new teachers, not long-standing teachers, which is where the cut-off is actually really happening. This is about correcting a historic injustice with teaching. Teachers since 2010 have had £6,600 a year cut from their salaries in real terms. That isn't an opinion, it's not part of political, it's Institute of Fiscal Studies. That's just maths, that's just counting. If you leave a profession of skilled people that much worse off and expect teachers to stay in the profession when they can get better paid jobs elsewhere, then we're kidding ourselves about the state of education.
Chris, I mean, are teachers historically underpaid and do they deserve more? Most people would say yes, wouldn't they?
Well, look, I've taught for 35 years and actually was a trade unionist myself. And I have some sympathy for teachers, but I have a lot more sympathy for children who have missed out hugely because of lockdown. And what we have to remember, and it's never mentioned in this debate, is actually the majority of staff in schools, according to the government's own statistics, are not teachers, they are support staff. There's plenty of money in the education system to pay the best teachers, good teachers, a good salary, but it means we have to change the way we teach. So we have fewer classroom assistants, not none, we have some, but we end up have fewer, and we have more what we call teacher-led teaching, so where the teacher at the front of the class, the children face in the front. Go to any primary school in the country these days, you'll find the children sitting around tables, half with their backs to the teacher, supported by classroom assistants. Do away with that and you save a lot of money, and you should then pay the good teachers because they deserve it. So there's money in the system, and going on strike is never acceptable.
You're talking about performance-related pay there, Chris?
I think we should definitely have performance-related pay. Good teachers should be paid more.
Callum?
I completely agree on performance-related pay. I also want to correct you slightly when it comes to the statistics around support staff. That is only true in primary schools. When it comes to secondary education, approximately 56%, so over half, are teachers or senior leaders within schools. So it's really important you've got to look at these statistics in their context. When you look at them in their context, actually, where the savings can really be made is things like capping energy prices. So, for example, some schools are facing £500,000 extra on their energy bills this year. Now, when we talk about the £2 billion extra for education, that's fantastic. That covers the energy bill. What about the unfunded pay rise? What about the fact schools are being asked to fund a 5% pay rise on a 2% uplift? That's just bad maths.
Look, the majority of teachers agree with me. They have not voted for strike action. And we have to remember, this is a highly political debate. We've seen in the papers in the last day or two a teacher in London putting on social media a poster which one of the children in the class actually put together, saying the only good Tory is a dead Tory, the only good Lib Dem is a dead Lib Dem. We've seen this before at Labour Party conferences. We've had teacher representatives saying as long as a single pupil leaves school and votes Tory, the education system is failing. So it's a political debate. We can argue over the statistic, but the truth is we are overstaffed in our schools and we're not doing particularly well. There is money in the system.
Callum, I mean, are teachers being led astray by sort of socialist rhetoric? It's all part of some general strike to try and realign the political order?
I can totally see where people get that idea from. When we look at that article, we know that's disgusting. No one is going to sit there defending political threats, especially after the death of 2 MPs in the last 10 years. Like, we cannot stress enough, violence and violent rhetoric is definitely not the idea. And also, actually, on the teacher demonstration of 40,000 people in London on Wednesday, there were people with Palestine posters,
I know, but there wasn't
socialist worker posters.
A lot of teachers aren't in favour of this, and that's a problem, isn't it?
Hang on. So, when you have those sort of people trying to hijack, actually, a debate which I think is about pay. Mine's about pay, and actually, more importantly, I think it's about workload. I think we need to focus on those issues rather than getting distracted with rhetoric in schools or stuff like that. We will always agree on the fact that we should not be using political violence, but we have to focus on the fact teachers are underpaid and overworked in this country.
Workload? I mean, are teachers of Callum's generation more overworked than your generation now?
Good teachers work very hard, and I would support the right of teachers to negotiate a higher pay rise. But there are very many great teachers, and there are a large number of poor teachers. All the children know who the good teachers are, all the parents know who the good teachers are, and all the staff know. We need to reward those who are best. So there is a case for teachers having a pay rise, a very strong case, but not for going on strike. Why should children, particularly children from poor backgrounds, suffer? And you know, we work with poor children, and what we find is their parents often cannot read and write. They can't help their children. So they are the ones who are suffering. Do not use the pupils, the children, as a pawn.
Chris makes a good point with regard to teachers perhaps prioritising their own needs above those of children. We had this criticism made of teachers, rightly or wrongly, during the pandemic, not having face-to-face learning, wanting to carry on. It's the same with lecturers in universities, still sticking to online learning, even though we're well beyond the vaccination. What's your reaction to that? Are teachers being selfish?
I think when you've got a government that openly refuses to negotiate in good faith, and that's not just rhetoric. Last week and the week before, meetings were cancelled between the union officials and the Education Secretary at the last minute.
But teachers specifically, Callum, let's just address this issue, because Chris is making this point that actually the children should always come first when it comes to the classroom.
When a government is refusing to negotiate in good faith, we have laws in this country that allow for trade union and industrial action. Are we seriously considering scrapping the laws because the government don't like the outcome? Are we really in that position as a society where we are going to scrap our very basic workers and human rights because we don't like one particular bit of strike
yes
action?
Or no answer to finish, Chris. Should teachers be allowed to strike in future?
They should be allowed to, but they should not harm children. Therefore, they should not go on strike readily. Most teachers will not go on strike.
Thank you very much for that, both of you. We've run out of time. Back next week at 9:30, but up next, Michael Portillo.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's